Tiernan and Kyle. Great unknown wise, it was a sleepy summer, but the green power consumption ran stronger than ever. I got my first summer job, and it was a very part-time position, doing grunt work for Rufflesack's parents' restaurant. It was a solid income for someone who spent their money on little more than green power, though. Even though I had to wash stairs, chop potatoes, and scrape off old paint from the lattice by the dumpsters, I found a way to mentally manage. Besides, it felt cool to get out of work late after helping clean up the kitchen and to be paid overtime under the table, only to wake up the next day to purchase a healthy portion of green power. Working only a few days a week, I had plenty of time to hang out at home and indulge in green power as I pleased while my parents were at work all day. Of course, this got boring after a while, what with River working 5 days a week at a summer camp and me having no other consistent friends. Though we had our fun with the sunrise crew at Teton's fire, I was still drifting away from the crew and can't recollect one time we hung out that summer. Naturally, I had to find other people to hang out with. That's when Tiernan and Kyle came into the picture. The first strange thing about these two brothers is that I had met them many years prior to this summer and even lived 2 doors down from them, but had never considered becoming friends and knew practically nothing about them. Looking back, though, I may have kept my distance because of our first encounter. I must have been in 6th grade then, because I know that Kyle was in 2nd and Tiernan was in 4th at the time, and I ran into them while playing behind the local school. It's a blurry memory, but I know for sure that Kyle was a 2nd grader who displayed a wealth of knowledge about Hitler and Mussolini, as if he was talking about superheroes he frequently watched on television. To amuse himself, he referred to me as Hitler for the duration of that first encounter. Even as a 6th grader, I was concerned, knowing very well that an 8-year-old definitely shouldn't know that much about the Second World War yet, let alone be that passionate about it. Still, there was something hilarious about a little boy with a lisp going on about World War II leaders. Then, to increase the comedy of it all, Kyle interjected, "That squirrel's gonna jump." He turned around to direct our attention to a squirrel in the distance, which was, indeed, about to jump from one branch to the other, but how exactly he knew that a squirrel behind him was about to jump was beyond me. Anyway, that was the only memory and knowledge I had about the two brothers prior to the summer going into my junior year, and at that point I had forgotten it almost entirely. Somehow, I found Tiernan on Basefoot, or BF as it is shortened to. I knew that we only had one house between ours, and that he was one who frequented the green power. I thought that at the very least I could be a good neighbour and share some of my green power with him. He was about to be a freshman in high school, and I had no problem making friends and playing a bit of Big Brother, since I had no younger siblings myself. So we connected on BF and decided to hang out after a short conversation. He seemed as bored with this town and as open to new friends as I was. I headed over and entered his family's den, where they had a nice big TV and an Xbox. Before I could offer up my own green power, Tiernan handed me a wooden green power vessel carrying case called a dugout and implored me to have as much of it as I wanted. This was the kind of hospitality I could get used to. I had barely spoken 2 words to the guy, and he not only put a hefty supply of green power in my hands, but also allowed me as much as I wanted. Tiernan was a pleasant fellow with a gentle kindness, and I was glad that I went out of my comfort zone to hang out with him. Then his brother Kyle came in, who I introduced myself to, but he wasn't as friendly as Tiernan was. "What's up?" he replied, more as a statement than a question, and asked Tiernan where the green power was. He took some, consumed it quickly and efficiently like a prescribed medication, and disappeared back into his room. I asked Tiernan how old Kyle was, and learned that he was 12 years old, going into 7th grade, and already a regular user of the green power. though this wasn't much younger than I was when I started, and it still wasn't the youngest green power consumption I had heard of. It was still a bit of a shock. Tiernan seemed to agree that his brother was young for green power consumption, but comically so, as if to say, "I know, right?" He's crazy, seeming to forget that this was his younger brother, someone he probably still had some influence over, but I decided to let it slide. It was none of my business, I figured, so I enjoyed the green power with Tiernan as we built our new friendship. We realised that we were both home most days of the summer, with little else to do but hang out and consume the green power whenever we pleased. I learned that they lived with only their dad, but it would be a year before I met him. In the meantime, I learned enough about their father to never want to meet him. What I'm about to disclose is knowledge about their family that I didn't learn until after a year of hanging out with them. The exact moment I learned this information isn't clear, but Tiernan revealed to me that he and Kyle had been consuming the white sands the whole time I had known them, and had been doing so at the allowance of their father. Not only had they been consuming the white sands since I had known them, but Kyle had tried the white sands before Tiernan, and had done so with his father when he was only in 5th grade. This was territory I knew little about, but I knew that the white sands were not good for anyone, and it was sad to me that such a cruel world had been introduced to Kyle when he was only 11. As Tiernan told it, he had turned down the white sands the first time that Kyle accepted his father's offer, but had proceeded to watch his father and his younger brother consume the white sands together for 2 years before eventually caving in. I applauded him for that, and couldn't blame him for giving in to what had become a family practice, even if it was a power as detrimental as the white sands. Tiernan had just started travelling down the White Sands Road the summer I met him, and was thus going into high school with a power education that exceeded that of most high school seniors, though it was surely nothing to be proud of. I couldn't imagine what kind of father would introduce his 11-year-old and 13-year-old sons to the White Sands, and I considered the behaviour to be child abuse. But that was after we had spent a year becoming close friends, simple comrades in our green power consumption, just trying to make summer a little more exciting. Still, Tiernan had also connected to DSL at the age of 13, quite a bit younger than me. He was even more precocious in his power usage than I was. Talks about powers that bring one to the great unknown led to talks of growing mycospawn. And Tiernan had a father who was never home. I had been doing my research and found that it was supposedly pretty easy to grow mycospawn, the gist of it being a patience and sanitation game. It turned out Tiernan would allow me to ship spores to his place, and we could also carry out the entire operation in his bedroom. He seemed confident that he could hide the business from his father with ease, and after his father left him for a month with a bag of 20 pre-rolled green power units for his birthday, I wondered how much of a shit his father would give, even if he did find out. So it was a go. Tiernan and I spent a day of the summer collecting all the necessary equipment at local hardware stores, and once the spores arrived in the mail, we had some jars of potential mycospawn incubating in no time. It probably wouldn't be until the end of the summer that we would have some consumable mycospawn specimens, but with any luck, we were sure that we would end up with a dosable amount. In the meantime, we had Tiernan's green power birthday present, and not much else to do, but make sure Kyle stayed out of trouble.